Welcome to Why Such a Fuss, an exciting new channel dedicated to help individuals and businesses to learn more about data protection in a way that is easy and engaging. I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, and I am a fully qualified data protection professional. I am passionate about educating, empowering, and enabling businesses to thrive. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel and help us to spread the word. Data protection is there for a reason. It protects you, your family, loved ones, customers, employees from coming to harm through the use of personal data. So make sure you click subscribe. Now, get ready to embark on a journey of growth and knowledge as we dive into the world of data protection. Annie McNeely, Quality Management System Professional and ISO 9001 Auditor, is joining us again today. Hi, Annie, and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Christina. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. In today's episode, we wanted to cover the frequently asked questions, FAQs, that we both get in our line of working as consultants, obviously from two different disciplines, but nevertheless, some of the, we do get the same relevant questions. So the first one on the list is, how long is it going to take?
Yeah, that's a good one. That is definitely a piece of string question, if ever there was one, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, same here. Yes.
If you're putting in a real live system that is bespoke to that business and applicable to the size of the business and their resources and so on, until you go into that business and have a proper poke around, you don't know how long it's going to take. And I always do a gap analysis before I do any sort of project planning. And even that only gives you part of the picture, because sometimes it's a bit like refurbishing an old house. You know, you go until you start pulling the wallpaper off, you don't really know what you're going to find. And very often it's the same thing. You know, you get partway into a project and a customer to sort of mention something that throws a massive spanner in it that hasn't come up previously, and then it's going to take more work. So I do my absolute best to give clients an idea of how long it's going to take, but always with the caveat that it might take longer, or indeed it might not take as long. It's a guide only. Some consultants take a different approach and say we'll get it done in X number of weeks. But they tend to be taking a somewhat more formulaic approach to things, probably a slightly lighter touch, if you like, in terms of processes and things. And that's why, you know, they'll get their clients certified. But I like to go more in depth than that and produce something which is very much attuned to that business. And that takes time.
Yes, and the same is exactly the same with me. You know, when they ask me that question is, well, how long is a piece of strings? And I always say, you know, it depends on the size and complexity of the organization. Yeah. And also, like, you know, I also do a gap analysis when I go in, because I need to understand what the gaps are and how to get us to where we need to be. But again, like you say, doesn't give you 100% because it doesn't go behind the wallpaper. Yeah. It's only when you start stripping the wallpaper down, then you start realizing, hang on a minute, we also need to do this bit. Yeah. I mean, I do tend to give them a little bit of a ballpark in terms of, saying, you know, between 3 to 6 months, if you want it done properly. Which is what I want. You know, for me, it's important that it's done properly, because otherwise, A, you're wasting your money, and B, you're not going to get the benefit out of it if you're treating it as a tick box exercise. A, I'm not the consultant for you, and B, you're not going to get the benefit out of it that you. Yeah, so that's what I always sort of say to them. And the other question that I always get, and I'm sure you get it as well, is how much is it going to cost?
Oh, Lord. Yeah. So, and it's a fair question. Of course it is. Because, you know, bringing consultants into a business is not a cheap exercise. I totally understand that. This goes with what I do. This goes very closely hand in hand with how long it's going to take, actually. Because the options are, obviously, my time costs money. So if you don't have a lot of resource in-house to apply to the project, I'm going to have to do more of that for you. Yeah. Which means it's going to cost more. So that how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? It's a bit of a balancing act between how much time can you as a business put into this to do a lot of it yourselves. That's less of my time, which is less of my fees, lower fees. But by the same token, if then suddenly there's an issue with their resource, it's going to take longer than we thought. So those two questions are very kind of interlinked.
Absolutely. And yes, like you say, it is an understandable question because obviously a business needs to budget, can I afford it? Is it within my budget? But to provide them with an estimate for us is very difficult because it's not until we see behind the wallpaper, as we said earlier, that we actually truly get the picture.
That's right.
So, I do tend to give my client a fixed price, but with the caveat that this is based on so many hours or so many days. If it takes longer, then additional cost will be added. And again, like you said, it depends on how many resources they can allocate to the project. Because the more they do, they embed it better because they get to understand it. So it becomes part of how they operate. And they acquire that knowledge. And B, is going to cost them less. In terms of the cost for the consultant.
Absolutely. I tend to do a sort of a two-phase costing. So I'll do the first phase, which is to get them as far as I can in terms of getting their system in place. And I'll charge that at my usual day rate based on X number of days a week or however that works out. And then there's a sort of a caveat in there that at the end of that stage, I'll then do a second gap analysis and compliance audit. And we'll work out how much more is needed, if any, how many more days are needed to get this right to the point where it'll go over the line. And then I will drop the day rate on that second phase so that it's not quite so painful for them. And it's just, it's additional work. They can see why there's additional work. The rationale is there. We agree that, and then we do any sort of additional days that are required to complete. And that usually works quite well because once they get through that first phase, like you say, they've got an understanding at that point of what's really involved. So you're not just slapping extra days on. They can see that we need to work on this area, and this area. And there's a logic to why it needs that extra time. And the reduced day rate takes the sting out of it a little bit. But that as an approach, that works quite well, I find. So they've got something to work with in terms of time and cost to start with, and then we revisit at a sort of critical point. So that's how I approach it.
Yes. So I do slightly different in terms of whenever I do a gap analysis, there's always one of the gaps that always comes back, over and over is training. Is a lack of training, or they've not done it to the depth that it needs to be done. So there is always a gap. So that's the first thing that I tackle. Because by training them, and when I say them, I mean the entire organization, it gives them an understanding, A, of the regulation, B, how to apply, but also it gives them an overview and understanding of the volume of work that is required. So all of a sudden, the big number associated with my cost, they start to understand it. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the same. When I do that initial gap analysis, that I create quite a detailed report actually of where they're already doing quite well. And where there's areas that need to be improved to get them to compliance point, and where there are just yawning holes that we have to create something. So as you say, right from the outset, they start to get a feel for what's really involved in putting this system together. It's important, I think, that they understand that.
Absolutely. And it's also part, of the buy-in. Absolutely. And transparency, so they understand that. And
managing their expectations, because they may have spoken to consultants who say, I'll get it done for you in a couple of months at a flat rate. And they will, but they're getting a very different service on that basis. So so that they can see they're not comparing apples for apples.
That's right.
They're getting something different for the cost. So,
Yes. Yeah. So the gap analysis are quite important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so another question that I get, and I'm sure you do as well, is, do we need to be involved?
Oh, yes. So with the things that I do, that usually comes from, so senior management bring me into the business to do this thing, but sometimes they think they can then sort of delegate it to a junior member of staff or a different manager and step away from it. And it doesn't work like that, really. They don't need to be involved in it necessarily day in, weekly, but they certainly need to be involved in it, because they have to agree to the things that we're putting in place. They have to sign things off. They have to put their name against things. They have to do some of the communication. They have to
yes, they need to understand the changes that the work is in place. Absolutely. And also, again, from a GDPR perspective, the buck starts and stops with them, with the senior leader. They are the one who are accountable. So like you said, they don't need to be involved every single day or in every single mental step, but overall they do need to be involved very much so, because otherwise they're going to stay. The people that they've been delegated to, some of them might not have the authority or the empowerment to deal with certain situations. But also it could happen that things are happening without their understanding, and then all of a sudden they find that their business has changed. You're thinking, hang on a minute.
I didn't know about that, or I'm not happy with that. Yeah, completely. And the standard, the 9001 standard, is very clear about the responsibilities of top management as well. They have some specific responsibilities, and they can't really carry out those responsibilities unless they have that insight into the system as a whole. So the short answer is yes, you do have to be involved. Sorry.
Yes. Absolutely. And it also, it's for your own benefit to be involved and understand. And again, I always go back to the training. So what you learned at the training, by being involved, you then now learn how to apply it. So because otherwise you're wasting your money. So I go back to you're wasting, because it's true. You're doing 100%. Something which, if you're not involved, if you don't understand, and if you don't buy into it, then it's redundant. It's redundant. It does. And that's where, you see that happen a lot with ISO systems, with quality management systems, and then they start having horrendous audit reports and have to do a bunch of remedial work, and it's kind of a false economy in terms of time, really, because you're going to have to spend it one end or the other, and it's a lot easier to just do it as you go. But when I'm putting a system in, I make it a point of updating senior management regularly of everything that's going on and having a sit down with them, if at all possible. And even if they're a bit reluctant to start with, once they see the stuff that's happening and going on, they get involved, because they realize that there's some significant things happening here, and I don't want that happening without my knowledge. So yes. No, I do exactly the same, especially if I am the data protection officer for some of my clients. I make it a point that I need to be involved and be part of the senior management meetings. Part of my role is to provide guidance and advice. So if I don't know what's happening, I can't do that, number one. But also, if there is a project going on as well, then I use it to give them an update and get them involved, or escalate things to them, etc. So definitely communication, it's key. But I think, so being involved, it definitely is a big yes.
Yes, that's a huge yes. Yeah.
So do we need to have someone working on this in-house?
I suppose it depends what you call working on it. During the project phase or the implementation phase, ideally, yes, because otherwise I've built the whole system and no one in the business really has any insight into it, which is not ideal, albeit you can counteract that with some fairly heavy duty training at a certain point, but it's not the best way to do it. Really, you don't necessarily need someone dedicated to the project in-house, but you need people available to help you with the things that you need to do. You need to sit down with people who are carrying out processes to map the processes, and you need to talk to senior managers about objectives and things like that. So they need to have people in-house working on the project to a degree, but not dedicated to it necessarily. Once the system is up and running, you don't have to have an in-house quality manager or internal auditor. And let's be honest, many businesses are too small to justify that. And when you try and lump it onto someone else's already busy schedule, that doesn't work either. So it's perfectly valid, and lots of businesses do this, to have someone like me come and do, I do retained quality management work. So I'll do a day or two a month of quality management for small businesses. And similarly, the internal auditing, and of course the internal bit is confusing because people assume that it has to be someone in-house. It doesn't. It's internal in the sense that it doesn't affect your certification. But I can do internal auditing for my clients, and I do. And in small businesses, it's really the only effective way to manage it. So long term, no, you don't, unless you get to a point, a size where it makes sense to have someone.
Yeah. And yes, I mean, I work with small businesses and charities, and they don't have the resources to have one resource dedicated fully to this. Yeah. So, and again, during the project, I'm the driver of the project, but I will need to spend time with various individuals within the organization to do the implementation. So I need them to dedicate that time to me, which could be, an hour here, an hour there, a couple of hours, depending on what they're doing. Mm-hmm. But, once it's finished, in order to maintain it, then either they have, they bring someone in, like me, for example, on a retainer services, that sort of goes in once in a while just to check things and keep things running, taking over. And then again, because the business changes, decisions are made, they always need that little bit of advice and guidance, again, from a data protection perspective. And I always recommend them to do at least an audit. It's a very, very minimum once a year, but if more frequent would be ideal, because again, you want to keep things ticking. But as a minimum, again, if you're a very small organization, like, one or two people, then once a year, I think it's enough.
Yeah.
But if you're a little bit bigger, maybe twice or every quarter, just to keep. It's almost like you want to make sure that your car is still working properly and efficiently.
Yeah, it's like an MOT, or a service. Yeah, absolutely.
So that is important. It's not just, once you've done it, that's it. Off we go. It's got to be maintained. And for one of the questions that I get is, do we need to have a software platform or a specific software? Mm-hmm. For me, no, you don't. I mean, there are data protection or GDPR platform and the software tools out there that are extremely good, and you can, of course, have that, which will kind of make your life easier. But you don't have to spend their money if you don't want to. You can do it. You can do it with spreadsheets, Word document, etc. And then, later on, perhaps once you're being more mature, and depending on your cash flow, then invest into a software platform that can manage it, that sort of manage the flow a little bit better, so everything is in one place rather than in different documents here and there.
I get that same. It's people who've had experience of ISO in a big business and are familiar with it being run through a platform or a management system. Online management system, and then they're now working in a small organization, and their assumption is that they have to sign up for something the same. And as you say, they can, but by and large, in my experience, those software platforms are great for bigger organizations where you've got multiple departments, and your process owners are getting into double figures and things like that. They're really useful. But in a small business, sometimes actually they're more trouble than they're worth. They're over-engineered usually for a small business. So you're paying for functionality that you don't need or won't use. And of course, as you say, there's that cost involved. Typically, when I work with small businesses, it's just not necessary. Like you say, spreadsheets are absolutely fine. SharePoint, OneDrive, all of that stuff works absolutely fine. And you just don't need to go to that level at that stage. Later on, as you grow, arguably it's worth it, but there's no need for that. Usually, 9 times out of 10, there just isn't a need for it.
Yeah, I mean, I That's right. I always start with the spreadsheet, the Word document, the the OneDrive, the SharePoint or Google Drive if they go Google Drive, whatever sort of environment they have. Because I want them to get used to the process itself. Do you know what I mean? And
good point.
Then once they've embraced it and they understand it, if it's appropriate, if it makes sense, if it's financially viable, then we move to a software platform as part of their maturity.
Yeah, but that's a really good point, that those systems, because those systems are capable of managing so much of it for you, the risk is, especially if they haven't really embedded during the implementation phase, the risk is, as you say, they're not fully plugged into the requirements.
Yes.
And there's a risk of that with ISO as well, because the system takes care of document review dates and document control and all sorts of elements of so it's not on your radar because the system does it all for you. And if it's not on your radar and you're relying on the system, sometimes it's actually worse, because it's easy to ignore a ping from the system saying you need to review this document now.
Yes.
They have their place and they can be fantastic, but they're not always the best thing, especially in a small business. And on a similar note, when it comes to mapping processes and drawing up those process flows, now some consultants their toes would curl when they hear me say this, but I do them in PowerPoint. And the reason I do them in PowerPoint is because small businesses don't have Microsoft Visio or Lucid Chart, or there's the software packages that are specifically designed for process mapping, and they don't need it. They're not mapping processes all the time, every day. All they're going to need to do is occasionally go in and if I'm not doing it for them, go in and update a process here and there. Everyone's got PowerPoint. They don't have to sign up for a license and get someone trained up on how to do it. If I'm not around and something needs updating, they can do it themselves. It works. It's fine. We don't need to go any fancier than that.
Interesting you say that, because I do exactly the same. I use PowerPoint to map the processes, to map the data flow, because one of the things that is a requirement under the regulation is to have a ROPA, which is basically a record of processing activities. And it's a combination of I do it in a spreadsheet, which is like a data inventory, but that is supported by a data flow map. And I do that in PowerPoint. Because there is, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that.
No.
If a client has Visio, because they are a bit bigger and a bit more mature in that respect, then I use Visio to do that. But if it's a small client, I do PowerPoint. It works well. People can, like you say, update it when it needs to be updated. They know how to use it. They know how to do it. Everybody has access to it. There's no point to make something more complicated if it doesn't need to be.
No. And actually, I mean, some people say, Lucid Charts, it's much it's faster. I don't think. You still got to draw arrows. You still got to drop boxes in. You still got to write I don't think it is any faster. No. Arguably, it looks more professional. It looks like a proper process flow. But that does not matter. That does not affect your compliance. It's purely a style thing, really.
Yes.
And it's just not necessary. If I have clients that already have Lucid Chart or Visio, I map it out in rough in PowerPoint. I send it to them and they work it up into their own, formatted process flows, and that's fine. But there's no requirement for that. It doesn't add any value very often, and it's an expensive enough process as it is without adding all these additional requirements in. So
yes. Okay, so next one on the list is, will you be with us when we have our external audit done?
Yes, is the short answer. I do not get and no consultant will do this. Every consultant who gets you set up with your quality management system will be there with you for the certification audit. Essentially, they're the sort of the technical lead. So whilst the auditor will be talking to the top management and other people in the business and be looking for them to be able to answer the questions, there are certain areas where really only the consultant will know the answer, because part of the consultant's job is to interpret the requirements of a standard and then apply that in an appropriate way to that business. So the auditor might just want a bit of a rationale behind something, or your justification for saying that that clause is not relevant, for example, and that's the consultant who will answer that. But I, with my clients, when I'm taking them through certification, there's lots of prep leading up to that. We do a fine-tooth comb sweep of all the documentation to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and everything. We make sure all the training records are up to date. Everyone's done that. I go through and talk to them about what this means, this audit, how it's going to work, what the auditor's maybe going to look at or pick up on. They get lots of prep so that on the day they're as relaxed as they can be. And we go through it together. So yeah, I don't abandon them and leave them to it on audit day. Audit day shouldn't really be stressy, but inevitably the first time around, if you've never been through anything like that before, it's a bit nerve-wracking. And to be honest, sometimes I get nervous as well about it, because it's my homework being marked, essentially.
Yes.
But by and large, it's a positive experience and everyone gets through it just fine. So yeah, I'll be there.
Well, in my world, there isn't really, and in terms of because obviously there isn't a certification for GDPR, so you wouldn't have the external audit regime, if you want, to maintain your certification. The only time that you would have an external audit would be when the ICO, the regulator, actually comes knocking at your door, and usually it's because you've done something naughty.
Done wrong,
Again, very often they would call me in to say, can you help us? Then of course, I will be there, but as the consultant in that respect. But in terms of a regular external audit, I would be the one doing that. Or maybe those are called internal audit, but there isn't, as I said, the external body that will come in is the actual ICO, the actual regulator, and only if you've done something naughty, you've come up to their radar because something has happened. But otherwise, I will be the one doing them. So,
and if the ICO, presumably, if the ICO does show up on their doorstep, you'll be there for that and help them through that.
Yes, absolutely. But only if they want me to.
Yeah, it's optional. Okay.
It's optional. I mean, if I am the data protection officer, that is definitely, because it is part of my role. I'm, as a DPO, I'm actually registered with the ICO. So if the ICO wants to investigate any of my clients where I am the DPO, they would contact me directly first.
Yeah.
Because I am their point of call. That's one of the roles and responsibilities of the DPO. But if I'm not, if I'm just a normal consultant, and the ICO wants to go and visit them, I would not know anything about that unless the client tells me. So yes, so that's how it works. So that actually leads me to the next question. Can we do our own internal audit? So for you, obviously, it's to do with, like you said earlier, internal audit. It's about doesn't necessarily mean it has to be someone internal doing it. It can be an external person like yourself. It just means that it's not the accreditation body doing it.
So you can do it yourself. The requirements are that the person doing it has an effective understanding of the standard. So you know that what you're auditing to in terms of compliance, that they have sufficient authority to pick up on things where they need to, including further up the food chain, and that they are impartial, because you can't mark your own homework. And in a small business, that's almost impossible to achieve, because there aren't enough people in there and you have to train them and it's expensive and so on. In a bigger business, you would have someone who is dedicated to, often it's quality and health and safety, or sometimes it's just quality, but that's all they do. So they are impartial in theory from everything else that's going on in the business. But in a very small business, it's like I say, it's almost, you can't achieve that because there's just no wiggle room at all. So technically, yes, you can, but it's difficult to do.
Yes.
Could we put,
Yeah,
sorry,
I'm the same. So a bigger organization. I mean, when I worked in corporate, we had like a governance and compliance department, and they would be the one doing the audit for compliance purposes, and they would have the understanding and knowledge of the various ISO standards and various requirements like health and safety, etc. But in smaller businesses, that is not possible.
No.
So very often you would get, you have to get someone external to do it for you, who has that, objective view of when they're auditing you. And also I quite like that because I'm looking at it from a pure objective perspective. When I go in, I get to go under the skin and get to ask, sort of being a little bit of a devil's advocate, and ask those perhaps, more
sensitive questions.
That perhaps they wouldn't ask, and challenge the leadership a little bit more. That otherwise, a junior person would not be able to do.
Absolutely, yeah. I can say things and have conversations with senior management that other people in the business would find very difficult.
Yes,
yeah, absolutely, it's the same, and that's where that impartiality. There's two things: it's impartiality, and it's kind of imparted authority because they've paid you to come in and do this for them. So yeah, it's more effective as a rule.
Okay. So next question is, do we actually have to do this?
I love this question. Yeah.
Yeah, so do I. Go on, you go first.
So despite your best efforts at managing expectations and laying it all out and doing the gap analysis and the report and everything at the start of the project, there comes a point when reality kicks in and senior management see stuff happening which is maybe going to be a bit of extra work or something that they never had to do before, or changing how they do something, and then you start getting pushback sometimes and resistance to the changes, and that's where this "do we actually have to do that" question comes in, because of course if they've not been doing any of this stuff before, business has been ticking along nicely, why are we suddenly having to do this? The answer is because you want to get ISO 9001 certification, and if you don't do it, you won't get certified. It is that simple. And you've paid me to come in as your advisor and your consultant, and I'm doing my job by putting this stuff in place and telling you, yes, you do have to do it. I'm not making it up.
It's exactly the same. It is the enthusiasm at the beginning, when you show them the results of the gap analysis and they understand their gaps and they go, oh wow, yes, okay, yes, we really need to do. And then, like you say, when reality starts kicking in, when they understand or they start being impacted by the changes, because obviously I always tell them this is going to be painful. It's not going to be a walk in the park. It will be painful, but at the end of it, you will reap the benefit. So despite the fact of warning them, there is, they get to a point where, like you said, resistance comes in and they ask this question. And so, my answer is, well, if you want to be compliant to the regulation, if you want to retain your reputation that you work really hard for, and retain your business, then yes, yes, you do need to do that. You brought me on board. You're paying me, like you said, I am your advisor. We looked, so we go back to I show them the gap analysis again. And I said, look, this is the progress that we've made so far. We've got this little bit, so that I show them that we're almost at the end, so that it doesn't feel like, oh my God, there's still so much to do.
Endless uphill climb.
Yes. And so that helps them to okay, fair enough. We've done so much. Let's do the little bit extra. And I said, because you will get the benefit. And then I also, if I can, but depending on where that question comes in the project life cycle, I also show them, look, by making this change that we did here, generated this benefit. Oh, yes, you're right. So it's just to help them to shift their mindset.
Absolutely.
But inevitably that question comes in, and it's totally understandable. So I don't resist it. I don't not that I don't like it. Do you know what I mean? I totally understand why when it comes in, and I work with that.
Yeah, I understand it too.
Yes.
It's that change curve, isn't it? It's a natural part of
Yes.
of going through that process that they get to the point where they start pushing back. And the extent of it depends on where they're starting from. If they're already quite a process driven company and they've got good record keeping and things like that, it's less painful. But where businesses aren't at a level of maturity where any of that is in place, so they're starting from a very low base, it is a much more painful process, and that resistance can kick in quite strongly. Usually, when I say to them, if you want to get certified, you've got to do this, they will accept that, albeit somewhat grudgingly sometimes. But when they really get on board, often is when the system's got to a point where it's starting to deliver data and information and insight, and then suddenly they're all for it, because they're more confident in their decision making because they've got evidence to base it on. They can see where the issues are and focus in on those, and everything starts to kind of work. That's when the resistance tends to disappear completely, usually.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. In my case, like you said, when they start seeing, the results of having these processes in place gives you those numbers, which are the facts. But also in my case is, when you are wanted to introduce, say, or something new, and we follow the process that the regulation obliges you to follow, and you see the outcome and it helps you to make that decision, then they start seeing the benefit. Or when by following the regulation they get approved by a client, or by they win a contract because they could demonstrate that they're compliant while their competitors couldn't. So all of a sudden they start to realize, hang on a minute. So then it's all full steam ahead. They can't get enough of it.
Yes, absolutely. It's the same. When my clients win that big contract and their certification has helped them to get that, it all starts to feel worthwhile, which again is understandable. I totally get it.
Gosh, absolutely, yes, absolutely. So that one I get quite often is, can I use the ICO templates?
Mm-hmm.
Of course you can. Absolutely. That's why they're there.
Yeah.
The question is, do you know how to use them?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why you are required to do the exercise? Can you put it in the context of the bigger picture? Do you understand the angle that the regulation is coming from? And so otherwise you're going to use the template, but you're not going to get the outcome that you need to achieve. That's where I come in, and where the training comes in as well. So I have seen organizations using the ICO templates, but because they haven't fully understood the purpose of doing it, so the why, then the data, the information that they put within the templates, it's irrelevant, it's not sufficient, it's pointless, and so then they've wasted their time. And so that's where you need someone to help you to do that, to understand. Once you've done it and you understood it, then you're good on your own. But just downloading a template, whether it's from the ICO or anyone else, without understanding the purpose of it, it doesn't lead you anywhere.
No, there's no point in reinventing the wheel.
No, of course.
I have no problem with I use templates. There's nothing wrong with templates, but templates are a tool.
Yes.
And they still have to be calibrated and set up and tweaked to suit your organization. So the template is just a starting point, and then you adapt it and modify it to suit the needs of the particular business that you're working for. So templates in and of themselves, no problem with those at all. Like you say, it's how you use them that counts. And as long as they are, it's a dead giveaway when you're reading someone's documentation. You can spot it if literally they've just pulled a template out and really not done anything with it, because it'll be referencing systems that they don't use, or job titles that don't exist in their business, or it'll be an approach that is based on having a bigger business with multiple departments, or you can tell if the template has not been if used effectively for that business. So yeah, no problem in principle as long as you use them well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And then do we need to do the training? So
Again.
for me, that it's a straight, yes, because the training is your foundation of building the house. If you and your team do not understand the regulation, then you're not going to understand anything else that we're going to implement, and the why and the purpose for it. And most importantly, you're not going to maintain it. You're going to, diverge and derail very, very quickly. So training is absolutely a fundamental for GDPR, because with GDPR, the responsibility of data protection is everybody, is not just the IT department. It's, making sure that, for example, things like it's how the data is being used that makes you compliant, is not the software. So your team needs to understand when they're collecting data, do they need to collect the date of birth if they only need to know the age of the individual? But then ask them how old they are. You don't need to collect date of birth, because the individual is understood, or your employee is understood that the date of birth is personal data, and if they can do it in a way that does not involve collecting personal data, then they should be doing that first. And so they've understood that from the training. Otherwise, they would carry on collecting that date of birth when it's not relevant, it doesn't have a purpose, and by doing that, you're not compliant. So that's why the training is absolutely fundamental, at least for GDPR. I'm guessing it's the same with you.
So where ISO is concerned, or ISO 9001 is concerned, there is a requirement that everyone in the business understands what this thing is all about. So you carry out awareness training, and that explains why this business is doing it, how it's going to benefit the business, how it works, what's involved, how it affects them. I've got my own awareness training slide set, which busts some myths and goes into, it doesn't talk about the standard. They don't need to understand the standard. They need to understand the system and their involvement in it, and that's what. And also, I talk about how audits work and things like that to try and ease the concern around audits. So that is pretty much a requirement that you carry out audit training. And then, of course, there is process training. So any new processes that you've put in, or any processes which may have changed, have to be trained into all the applicable people. So that they can answer, so that they're doing it the right way, and also so that during an audit they can talk knowledgeably to the auditor. So those two are always done. And then in my case, depending on the business and where the gaps are, I might carry out supplementary training. For example, I might do a workshop on how you manage non-conformities. If they've never come across this before, it's a bit of an alien concept. So what is a non-conformity? Where do they come from? Why are they important? And what do you do about them in terms of actually actioning it? And what do you do about it in terms of admin for the system? Things like that. I might do a little presentation about SMART objectives, because a lot of small businesses don't set objectives, at least not that they've never set quality objectives. They may not know that concept of SMART objectives. So I'll do a little piece of training on that. So wherever training is going to boost the efficacy of the system, I will add that in. Yeah,
definitely. And can you do it all for us?
Yeah. So technically, yes. But no, I would. I mean, it depends what they mean by all, to be fair. But I can't set their objectives for them. I can't carry out a SWOT and a PESTLE for them. I can do it with them, but I can't do everything for them. I can certainly, I can map their processes and write them up and draw, but I can't sign them off. I can't own them. Someone has to tell me how that process works. So you cannot literally say yes to the job and then come back in 3 months and their system's done. You just can't. Not if you want an effective system. So there has to be that level of interaction and involvement from the business.
Yeah.
The only caveat I would put on that is that sometimes businesses need to get their certification very quickly, or as quickly as possible, because they've got a big client who wants to use them, but it's subject to their certification. I don't like to work like that, but I get it. In those instances, it's about get it over the line. Just get it over the line. My approach to that would be, okay, we'll get it over the line, but then we continue working on it after you're certified until we know that the system is embedded, it's optimized, it's working, everybody understands. So I do the work that I would do anyway, but we do it after certification. So that is an option. But otherwise, no.
Yeah, and I mean, my when they asked me that question, I said, well, I can do it with you in terms of, yes, I can create the processes, I can document the policies, for example, do a bunch of other things, but with your input, because I cannot make things up. A security policy, for example, will vary from business to business. Different businesses have different security measures, so I can't just make it up.
Exactly.
The data that you collect for your business, they're relevant to your business, will have a different purpose and a different usage than another business. So, and I can't make that up. So I will need your input.
Yeah.
But then ultimately, you are still the one who's accountable.
100%.
So you will need to have that involvement, because when it comes to answer questions to the regulator, you are the one who's going to be on point, not me.
Yeah, same in a certification audit. The auditor expects the owner of the business or the MD or the general manager to know what their quality management objectives are and how they relate to company strategy. I'm not going to be answering that. They are.
Yeah.
So whilst I can create a proposed set of objectives based on what I've extracted from SWOT and PESTLE, for example, or risks, they still have to agree them and approve them and allocate resource to them, and so they still have to agree it and adopt it. I can propose it all, but I can't sign it off because it's not my business.
Yeah. So it's the same with me. I can give you the process and the templates if it's relevant with regards to a data breach, for example, but then you need to know how to address it.
Yeah.
So if you don't know how to do that, there's no point in having the process. Same with subject access requests, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I can do it with you, but I can't do it for you.
Yeah.
So then the last one is, can I delegate to a member of my team? Well, during the project, again, I will be the one driving the project, and I, need to work with various people so long as they make themselves available. And I don't need to have that day-to-day involvement with the CEO or the leadership. So in that sense, you could, delegate the contactability, give me like a single point of contact that I can go through. But in terms of accountability, no, you can't delegate that. So,
whether you like it or not, you are responsible for this stuff. Yeah. Or accountable for it, big picture.
Yes,
same.
Absolutely. So, and I think, again, and I see this more and more in small businesses, because in a small business, the managing director wears multiple hats.
Yeah.
And so they're already stretched.
Yeah.
And so it's understandable, it's totally understandable.
Sure. Yeah.
But unfortunately, accountability comes with that top job.
Yeah. It does.
Unfortunately, it can't be taken away from you.
No. You can't delegate those core responsibilities under ISO. As top management is top management, and you have a set of responsibilities. You cannot delegate those. No. What you can delegate is actions, management, follow up, things like that.
Yes.
But you can't say as the general manager that you're gonna let your PA go to the management review meetings, or you're gonna let the sales director do that for you. That's one of your responsibilities. You've got to do that. So it depends a little bit on which bit of it we're talking about. But you're right. The accountability sits at the top and stays there.
Yeah.
You might have someone in-house who's kind of taking on responsibility for the day-to-day.
Yeah. I was one told, and it's so true, you can delegate responsibility, but you cannot delegate accountability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So accountability sits with the top layer. And so there you go.
Yeah.
Annie, thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Would you mind reminding our audience how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn as Annie McNeely. My website is www.anniemcneely.co.uk, and my email is annie@anniemcneely.co.uk. So hopefully easy to find.
Thank you. And if you have liked this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and remember to click on the subscribe or follow button. If you would like to get in touch with me, I can be found on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for CVG Solutions. Alternatively, email me at info@cvgsolutions.co.uk.